This is the Dallas Morning News.
Hello, everybody. Welcome into SportsDay Insider, presented by the Dallas Morning News. I am Kevin Sherrington, joined by my pals Evan Grant and Joe Hoyt. Joe's on with us to talk a little mock draft. Joe just had his mock draft 2.0 that came out this week. It's mentioning choices on there, and we're going to talk about that a little bit right now. And let's see here, Joe. First of all, let me ask you, how much did the 2.0 change from 1.0?
Yeah, decently. I think it's one of those things where you're trying to guard a little bit about your own biases or your own developments from what you learned at the combine. I mean, the combine is obviously such a catalyst for everything with mock drafts, and you get so much information from it. Like, you'll see in the top 11 that there's definitely a lot of changes. But I think that, you try to a little bit stay consistent to what you thought while also adding in tidbits of what you learned. I'll give you a good example. In my first mock draft, I had Jeremiah Love going very late. I think back end of the first round. And that's because I was like, I get how good he is. But there was a lot of easy running lanes at Notre Dame. And then I'm looking at it, I'm like, how many teams are actually going to use a first round pick on a running back when they have other needs? And it took one 40-yard dash, and just even looking at the guy in person where I'm like, okay, this guy's not getting out of the top 10. So he vaulted all the way from the back end to the top end of this draft. And I think that's something that is encouraging for Cowboys fans, because you need offensive guys to go in the top 11 if you want to get one of the elite guys defensively in this draft. Yeah,
he's like the Saquon Barkley of this draft, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley. This is a guy, when he runs a same 40-yard dash as Jahmyr Gibbs at that size, this is someone you just can't afford to pass up if you have any inkling that you might need a running back.
Yeah, for sure. So tell me, Joe, when you were there at the combine and watching all that, how much does it, and you talk about that a little bit, but just a little bit more about how much that changes perceptions when people see these things, because I would hope that scouts are mostly going by tape, right? How does a guy play? And then they get in here, and you heard horror stories about people going in there and they do, the defensive tackle does 10 bench presses, and it's terrible, and their draft stock just plummets because of that. Do you feel like that the combine is a viable thing for evaluation of talent, or is it a little overblown?
No, I think it's a key evaluator. I think film has to be the lifeblood. One thing that Christian Parker, for example, and Will McClay both said is you can't go chasing traits, but traits can also tell you a little bit more about that person, right? And I think, like, for example, Kenyon Sadiq versus Eli Stowers, right? These two tight ends put on a show. And Eli Stowers, set the record for the highest vertical jump and the longest broad jump among tight ends in NFL history, right? And Kenyon Sadiq ran the fastest 40-yard dash among tight ends ever at the combine. Both those guys were record-setting athletes in different ways. And I think that if you look at their film, you can see why. Like, you can see that kind of more speedy explosiveness from a guy like Kenyon Sadiq, right? But you can see the long, high point ability from a guy like Eli Stowers, who's, was a 5-star quarterback coming out of Denton-Guyer, right? And a high jump champion, state champion. So I think those things like that tell you stuff. I think another good example, one of the classic examples I always point out, is Brock Purdy, right? 40-yard dash, nothing special. But he had the same 10-yard split as Christian McCaffrey in terms of what they ran at the combine. And that tells you one thing about Brock Purdy is he's quick. He might not be fast, but he's quick. And it's little things like that can solidify thinking or make you kind of open your eyes to things. Dylan Thieneman, I think, is a good example. This is a guy that ran a 4.35 40-yard dash at the combine. We knew he was fast, and it kind of shows up on film. But then you see things like that, and it makes you want to go back and watch film and be like, man, I didn't know he was that fast. So I still think it's a good tool. It's a good reminder. It's a good reason to go dig deeper into certain things. One other example we'll talk about is Reuben Bain and his arm length. Now that we have a solidified measurement on what his arm length is, now you got to go back and wonder, did this arm length affect him in certain ways at the college game or not affect him that might affect him at the NFL when guys are bigger and longer and more athletic.
All right, let me ask you. This is a little sidebar here. I just had a little problem here this last season with Jake Ferguson. He looked a lot like Jason Witten at the end there. Not a lot of yards after catch. Was that a lingering effect of the injuries that he had, or should Cowboys fans be a little worried that this guy is not going to be a producer going forward?
I think it's two things. I think you have to question a little bit of the athleticism because at certain points he just looks slower, to be honest. And the explosiveness was just not there that he kind of showed a little bit more early on in his career. But also I do think that there was an argument to be made that he was a consistent check down option. I think he was kind of a failsafe at certain points in their schemes, for Dak Prescott to check down, especially considering you had guys like CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens you wanted to get the ball to. So I think a little bit of combo of both. I think Ferguson, is going to come into the season hoping for more of a bounce back for sure in terms of his explosiveness. But the check down was a viable or a legitimate part of that stat story, I think.
All right. Okay. All right. Without further ado, then let's get on this thing.
How did we go there? I just don't understand.
How did we go where?
How did we go from the combine to Jake Ferguson?
Because he talked about tight ends and about how athletic they were. Kenyon Sadiq, the fastest time ever for a tight end. And so therefore it made me think of the fact that Jake Ferguson was not very good last year, Evan.
But I thought we were talking about the draft and the combine.
Let me say this: they're not going to select a tight end high in this draft, and they probably won't select one at all. If that helps.
I want to get back to Reuben Bain and his crocodile arms.
Evan, just be quiet. When we talk about the Raiders, you can talk then. All right, let's go back to the top. So we'll start at the top here. Give us a go here, Joe, and your picks, and we'll try to hurry through them as quickly as possible because Evan is just sick of talking about the draft. So go ahead.
I want to talk about the guys the Cowboys might take.
I'll run through this quick and then we'll get to the Cowboys. So Mendoza, rinse, wash, repeat, number one at the Vegas. It's obvious. Jets, I think they're going to be deciding between Arvell Reese and David Bailey. I think they need an athletic edge rusher. Here I go with David Bailey to the Jets. First one I went Arvell Reese. I think Bailey's more higher floor while still having that good ceiling athletically. Arizona, first place where you might actually see Jeremiah Love go. I give them Arvell Reese. Just, I think that they need just juice on both sides of the ball. Here they take a linebacker that can do that. Tennessee, Jeremiah Love. That kind of seems like a match made in heaven. That was one of the conversations and things I heard at the combine is that's a logical place for them with new head coach Robert Saleh. New York Giants, and this is the first heartbreaker for Cowboys fans. I think they could take Sonny Styles or Caleb Downs here. I think John Harbaugh is going to want kind of a tone-setting defensive playmaker akin to what he had for so many years in Baltimore. Here I give them Caleb Downs, gives them the versatility that Baltimore had in Kyle Hamilton. Caleb Downs, I think, is fantastic, even if he didn't work out. Cleveland, I went Francis Mauigoa from Miami, athletic, big, to a captain for a team that went to the national championship. He's a stud. Washington, I went with Sonny Styles. I think that they had Bobby Wagner at the end of his career. I think that they want someone who could be that moving forward. Sonny Styles lit up the combine. He's someone that I would be shocked if he escapes the top 7. Sorry, Cowboys fans. New Orleans.
Let's hold on just a second there, Joe. So I want to talk about that, but it's okay with Evan.
That was Sonny Styles was a dream scenario for you, Joe, and for you, Kevin, right?
Yes.
So he's a classic example here because he was the talk of the combine, right? 6'5", 243 pounds, fast, just showed everything you could possibly want here. And I think, like let's say a month ago, there is a possibility. There's a good possibility the Cowboys could get him. And now I've seen on even some boards that he's going as high as 4 or 5. Which is just really kind of seems crazy for a linebacker at this point, a true linebacker, not an edge rusher. So that does feel like it's a done deal, doesn't it?
Yeah, I don't think he's escaping the top 7. And to your point, I think he could go as high as 4. Because I think if you look at who the Titans I named their head coach is Robert Saleh, and who has Robert Saleh had for the majority of his DC/head coaching career? He's had Fred Warner. I think if someone understands the value of a guy like that, it's a guy like Robert Saleh. And I'll tell you this: the Cowboys did meet with Sonny Styles. I was told very impressive in that meet, like very impressive in terms of this is not just an athlete. They quizzed him. They did some things on the board, and he was good.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of which, same thing. Caleb Downs. I was reading Jordan Reed for ESPN on his mock draft this morning. Said he's the smartest player I've ever evaluated.
Yeah.
That is really something to say. I would be all for the Cowboys putting some smarts on the defensive side of the ball. That would be great. But
Yeah.
Joe,
obviously not
I
happening.
just want to ask this: do you feel like, and we're still not to the guys who are, I guess, legitimately in the Cowboys realm now, but do you feel like I've just gotten a sense talking to you over the course of this whole thing that you feel like Styles might end up being the biggest impact player on the defensive side from this draft? Maybe I'm reading that wrong. Do you now feel like Bailey is that guy, or that Reese is that guy?
It's a great question because it kind of goes back to how do we determine ultimate value and impact, probably. I think with a guy like Sonny Styles, he's also going to do a lot of things that don't show up on film, right? Or don't show up just on your broadcast on Sundays. He's going to be someone that I think, and there's a candidate for the Cowboys in that realm I think could fit this too. He's someone that gets guys aligned. He's someone that communicates well. He's someone that can be kind of a raiser of tides. And I think that that's going to be something that defensive coordinators do not undervalue. I think in terms of flash, I think David Bailey has the chance to be the most impactful guy because I think David Bailey is just. I think he's got good moves. I think his just athleticism is. I think his athleticism with his frame just gives the instant impact type of guy. It's one of those things, and this goes back to the combine and its value. I knew he was quick. Like for example, I watched him dominate Oregon, right? And he kicked the crap out of Oregon. Watching him just even get off on a 40-yard dash, I was like, oh, it makes sense. No one had a better get off, I think, with their 40-yard dash than David Bailey did. And if that's something you would love to see from edge rushers, I think he's going to be fantastic wherever he ends up.
And I'm all for that. But here's the thing, too. And look, I'd take any of those guys, right? If I'm the Cowboys, they can use any of them, But the thing for me about at the linebacker position is that if you, and I know that's a different game today, but if you talk about greatest Cowboys ever, they just buried one of them, last year in Leroy Jordan. These were guys who played a decade, at the position for the Cowboys. When is the last time the Cowboys had a linebacker who played more than 3 or 4 years? And they just haven't had. I know the position has been, devalued somewhat, but I still think if you look at a guy, you mentioned Bobby Wagner a while ago. Look at Bobby Wagner, how long he has played, and how long he's played at such a high level, and what he has brought to defenses. I just think that to be able to bring a guy of that character and of that kind of ability, and just to have that kind of stability at the position as well. I feel like he's not going to be there, so it's probably all moot anyway. But I think it's important to note that they at some point the Cowboys have got to hit on a linebacker. Now, obviously, they drafted Jalen Smith, they drafted Leighton Vander Esch, and they probably shouldn't have drafted Leighton Vander Esch because they knew that he had a neck problem of some kind, and that ended up shortening his career. And we saw, and Jalen was a second rounder, and they tried to make that work, and it kind of worked for a little while, then it didn't really. But they have, there are so many important positions for them on defense, and I realize that you can't just point at one. But if I was going to point at one really right now that I think they could get one out of this draft, it's either a linebacker or a safety that could be a fixture for a long time for the Cowboys.
And yeah, I mean, I think that Kevin, your points are great, and I just wonder how much, like, we're evaluating on an old school level because I don't know how much anybody drafts for longevity anymore. I don't know how much anybody drafts thinking this is going to be a decade long force in our defense or our offense. especially with the free agency situation. You're drafting for who's going to make an impact right out of the chute. But I agree with you. I mean, that's why, to me, it sounds like Styles is going to have, nobody knows what the injury situation is, but to me, it sounds like Styles is best set up to have a long and successful career. And that's why, if I'm a draft guy, I'm probably looking him at my number one defensive pick in the draft.
Yeah, and it also goes back to to your point, Evan, like Arizona has a lot of needs, right? The Jets have a lot of needs. So do you want to get something that might be more, in terms of let's just put him here and he could be the centerpiece of our entire defense and get everyone better? Or do we try to get the more elusive thing? Because that's the part of this too, is elite pass rushers like David Bailey and Arvell Reese. We're talking 1 or 2 a year. And Ruben Bain is a great example, right? Because Bain is so talented, so powerful, but he's not the elite athlete measurement guy that you might want in a top 5 pick. So, and that's why trading Micah Parsons was so controversial, because he's so elite and so rare. So I still think that's why those guys go higher. But if we're talking about you want someone to just be the centerpiece for you, Sonny Styles is hard to ignore.
All right, let's go. I interrupted you at 7 with Commanders, I believe. So then your eighth pick.
Yeah. So this is where I think things get a little interesting, because I think in New Orleans you have Kellen Moore, right? A guy who wants offense. I think if Jeremiah Love is there, he might sprint to the podium to get that. But here I gave them Cardinal Tate, wide receiver from Ohio State, and I think with these receivers it's so fascinating, because I don't know if there's a true clear-cut number 1 wide receiver. In this pack. Like, I think that you can make an argument for multiple guys. Jordan Tyson's fantastic from Arizona State and Allen. Denzel Boston's big, right? Mekhi Lemon is fantastic as long as he's not staring, you in the face during interviews at the combine, right? Like, so I think that there's a lot of guys there. I went with Cardinal Tate here. You get 2 Ohio State guys and him and Chris Olave. And I think Kellen Moore and Tyler Shuck could have fun with that. Kansas City, I had them taking Kenyon Sadiq in the first one, and I kept Kenyon Sadiq in the second one. The first one was contingent on them, Travis Kelce not retiring. This time I don't care. Kenyon Sadiq is stupid athletic. Production's a question at Oregon, but I'll tell you what, he did a lot of things that at Oregon that were not, measurable in terms of statistics. Cincinnati is where I gave Ruben Bain. And I think that Trey Hendrickson is a guy that's likely going to pass into free agency. We'll see at the trade deadline, the franchise tag deadline here in a couple hours. If they tag him, I would assume they just try to trade him. I think pairing Ruben Bain with Shamar Stewart, and I think Ruben would be more of a concrete thing. I think that gives Cincinnati a fighting chance on defense with the 2 wide receivers and Joe Burrow they have on offense. Miami, I had them taking Caleb Downs in the first one. I gave them Mansour Delane this time. Mansour Delane, I think, in my opinion, is the clear-cut number 1 corner in this draft. I think he's someone, if he was there at 12, Dallas would sprint to the podium. I just don't see a lot of scenarios where that happens, barring more offensive linemen sliding up into the top 12 or the top 11 to push a guy back. Delane is fantastic, and I think Jeff Hafley being a defensive backs guy, that's where he ends up going. And at 12, this is going to be a controversial thing, and I've had him now back-to-back times. Jamad McCoy, the corner from Tennessee. You can make an argument he's the most talented corner in the NFL draft. Obviously tore his ACL last January, and then he didn't work out at the combine. And that was a red flag for a lot of people on the outside. For me, I'm not going there yet. I don't think it's unfathomable that a guy would want to wait and do things on his home turf and get a little bit more time, to train. And after the tearing his ACL last January, he said that he was even pushing to play last year in the end of the regular season for Tennessee. And if they would have gone into the college football playoff deep, he said he was fine right now. I just think in terms of the talent, that's too hard for the Cowboys to pass up. They need an elite corner. And I know Cowboys fans would be like, you're going to rely on Savone Rebel, Veron Bland, and Jamad McCoy. That's the law firm of very, very injured and even more injured, right? And I think, though, that you take that risk for a guy like Jamad McCoy and see what happens at 12.
So you have any idea when Tennessee's pro day is?
Not off the top of my head.
Yeah, well, that's going to be really interesting, right? I mean, Joe and I had this discussion before about, do you really want to take another guy because they took Javon Rebel last year, as you pointed out? who was hurt and comes in late, and so I'm not saying that was a bad pick, but I really feel like they need with this first pick to have a guy that there's no questions about. I know I'm not, and McCoy may be that. We'll see, right? We'll see how he does on his pro day, and if he runs and tests fine and everything's good, well then that's probably a likely pick because, as you had noted, he and Delane both were considered really good cornerbacks. They're talking about both of these guys would be number ones on your team if you drafted them at the quarterback position, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think worth noting, too, some other guys I considered taking at 12 for the Cowboys, because I think this would be a weird board for them if it felt this way. And I think ideally you trade back in this situation. Maybe you pick up another day 2 pick by going back from 12 to 17 or something like that. But a couple other guys I consider taking. I think one of my takeaways from the combine they have a ton of interest in is CJ Allen from Georgia. I think we talked about floor raiser. We talked about a linebacker that gets everyone aligned. Schumann, the defensive coordinator there, one thing CJ Allen told us is that in the little 15-second window conversation between defensive coordinator and green dot player, which CJ Allen was, Schumann didn't call plays often. He gave little pieces of reminders and nuggets to keep in mind. And so CJ was out there making checks and playing defensive coordinator on the field. That is a absolute far cry from what the Cowboys had last season, with in terms of alignment and getting things ready to go. I think they want to pair someone to Marvion Overshone for the long term. That could be that kind of Mike, that green dot player. Don't be surprised if CJ Allen is the pick at 12. I don't think he gets past 15, which is where I had him going to Tampa Bay. Another couple guys I considered, Avion Terrell, the slot corner from Clemson. He's someone that's got a wide range, I think, of where he might go. 12 would be high, but also I think he is your Jordan Lewis replacement. I think that is someone that you can solidify your slot corner spot. He's athletic, he's fleet-footed, and he's just a dog. He is someone that is, maybe it's the short king in me that just loves shorter guys that like to fight. You would take him into an alley with you because he is that much of a fighter and gritty. And I'm a big fan of Avion Terrell. And then Dylan Thieneman, the safety from Oregon, they didn't meet with him, which was kind of like a dog turning the ear, going, huh? Like I thought that was a little interesting. Maybe I'm reading too deep into it, but he's someone akin to Caleb Downs that could play in multiple different systems, understands multiple different coverages, and could be versatile as someone who can play at safety and also come down into the box and play that star position if need be.
So to your point about trading down, Joe, and I cited Jordan Reed's draft this morning, the ESPN, he had them doing just that, trading down to 16 and picking up a 4th rounder and a 7th rounder. Now, does that sound like something that would be doable? If, as you just pointed out, if you've got 4 or 5 guys that you are on you're pretty much on the same level with all of them at 12, then you're probably, I couldn't see them trading back much further than that, though. Could you? 16 or 17?
That was, to me, feels like the ceiling for it, just because they know they need to hit on multiple instant impact starters in this draft and in free agency. And if you start going beyond that, you're testing the waters, I think, a little bit of potential instant impact guys. I mean, you still could potentially get a guy like Hakeem Mesidor there, who's older, has some concerns, but could be an instant impact potential 3-4 outside linebacker in your system that kind of lines up closer to the line of scrimmage. So I think you'd be playing a risky game if you're the Cowboys there, in a situation where you need to have some certainty.
Yeah. All right, one last thing before we let you get out of here, Joe, because you and I had this discussion briefly Monday about Ruben Bain, who I love Ruben Bain just because he plays so hard, the production he gets and the power and the rest of it. But, he's dinged because of the short arms. You feel like that in the Cowboys' new scheme, the 3-4 that they have now under Christian Parker, at least that's their base defense, that they would want him to be an outside linebacker, and he's not an outside linebacker, right?
It's tough because, like, when we hear 3-4 and we think outside linebacker, I think a lot of people's mind still goes to, like, off ball 4 or 5 yards deep, right? And it's not necessarily true. Obviously, you can line up in a 2-foot stance right off the line of scrimmage and play true like an edge, just like Micah Parsons used to, right? I think for the 3-4 and for what the Cowboys envision as a potential outside linebacker rather than an on the line defensive end, I think that's too much of a gap in terms of being a tweener. That's kind of a crevice I wouldn't want to put him in my opinion. I think that that's something that's too wide of a gap between what you would ideally want for him, because I think he would actually be a good defensive end, potentially with the Cowboys but in this system. But also, when are you taking Quinnen Williams or Osa Odighizuwa off the field, and using a first round pick when you have so many other needs to do it for a guy like Ruben Bain? That's kind of my opinion. He also might be too good to pass up at 12. And they just say, hey, we'll figure it out. But I wouldn't do it personally. Other thing before we go, they did have with the 20th pick, I did give them Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, the safety from Toledo. He's a big dude. One of the rarest things that's ever happened, he got undersold by Toledo in terms of his size. Toledo had him at 6'2". He measures in at 6'3.5" at the combine.
How did that happen?
Makes you wonder. Maybe he had a growth spurt recently. I don't know. But I think the Cowboys, I talked a little bit with Avion Terrell. I think that he could play the slot. I think one of the most pivotal positions they need to find is not only a slot corner, but someone who could play the star for them. And the star is someone that could be a safety, a big safety. It could be a smaller slot corner. It's someone who could play at all three levels of defense. I think a good example is you even saw a guy like Devon Witherspoon for the Seahawks, right? Smaller, but he played in the slot a lot and would blitz off the edge and make plays. And in the Super Bowl specifically, they need to find someone who could fit that role in Christian Parker's system. McNeil-Warren, I think, would give him that, and I think that would be a very exciting pick for them at 20.
Joe, since the officials added some extra time because of Kevin's Ferguson detour,
I'm sorry that's so offended, Evan. Just occurred to me.
I want to go back to this actual draft. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just throw a hypothetical out there for you. Let's say that there was a route in which the Cowboys came out of day one with either Delane or McCoy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And CJ Allen. How big of a home run would that be for the Cowboys?
It would be huge. I mean, and specifically, I would say Delane a little bit over McCoy. And just if we're talking absolute home run, we're talking Barry Bonds into McCovey Cope type stuff. Because I think those would just give you two certainties. I think, obviously there's always a little bit of a question with rookies. I think that would give you at least a capable starter at corner and someone in the middle of your defense who, at the very, very least, will get everyone on the same page, will have all the checks down, will be able to recognize and diagnose things day one at the NFL level, and be kind of that coach on the field, an extension of Christian Parker. This defense, anytime you have the worst defense in the NFL in the last 5 years in terms of EPA allowed, there wasn't one thing that went wrong. There was a, catastrophic array of errors that accumulated into what we saw every Sunday with the Cowboys last season. You need certainty. You need instant change. You need instant impact. CJ Allen and Mansour Delane / another corner, I think, would give you certainty on a defense that sorely lacked it last season.
So what would it take for the Cowboys to put themselves in a position where they could get Delane, maybe move into the top 10, and maybe trade 12? What would it take for the Cowboys to put themselves in a position to get those two players?
I don't think they'll do it, because I think that they have so many needs that that they'll look and say, hey, we'll sit back and just hope. They cite the CeeDee Lamb draft all the time, right? And I think that's because, hey, we sat back and next thing you know, something great fell in our laps. I think that that's something that they would rather do. I'm with you though, Evan, to be honest with you. If you need certainty, shoot, why not just trade 12 and maybe next year's third round pick to get to 10 and make sure you get a Delane or a Caleb Downs or something like that, right? I would do that. And then the other, while we're just talking, the other potential home run, obviously, is if they trade one of those first round picks for Max Crosby, in my opinion. I don't think they will, because they would, cap space would be interesting. And, I think that kind of, I just don't see it happening. But if they could somehow parlay what they got from Micah Parsons into a package of Quinnen Williams and Max Crosby, I think that would be a home run too.
I mean, I just feel like if they can, if all these draft picks that they've collected and the remake of the defense, if you can get 2 real impact players in the first round, then you do whatever you need to do with your draft collateral a little bit
Oh,
later
Evan,
on.
you didn't care about that until you brought up C.J. Allen from Georgia.
No, I did. I mean,
you just want a bulldog. Come on.
But Evan, he's a stud, right? In terms of being that tide raiser is kind of
I
the
mean,
way.
look, Kevin can't stop drooling over Howie Roseman, okay? And what has Howie Roseman built his defense on? Players who came from the Kirby Smart system. And I think you could do a lot worse than adding the centerpiece of a Kirby Smart defense to a defense that has so many needs and lacks stability. And as you said, I mean, you feel like Delane is the best cornerback in this draft. And so if you can get the real impact player at a position of need, I'm willing to trade some picks, that I've gathered from this disastrous Micah Parsons deal to remake the defense.
Well, you're going to have to go into next year's draft to do that because they don't really have any picks to trade other than that second one in the first round. So, it's an interesting proposition. I would certainly look. You got to entertain anything, right? At that point, and you got to be able. But I'm also kind of cool with letting things kind of get to a certain point to see what's happening there because you don't know. Delane might go sooner than that. If he goes like it looks like he's going to go 5th or something crazy, and you don't know what anybody's going to do at that point.
Sure.
You just can't tell. But it's certainly all worth entertaining. All right, Joe, we got to let you get out of here, man. We're sorry to keep you on for so long, but we've really enjoyed it. I love talking about the draft and all this kind of stuff. Roster building is always a fun time of year. So,
Joe, Kevin has a few more questions about that tight end that the Cowboys drafted from San Diego State a few years ago. What was his name?
Well, I wanted to talk about the one that was this year. I'm sorry that little sidebar really offended you so much, Evan. But
worth noting that they're very optimistic about Brevin Spanford. I will say
I know they
worth
like
noting.
Him. I like him too. He's a big guy. He plays on special teams. I think there's some potential.
He had over 20 special teams tackles last season, by the way.
Is that right?
I mean, shoot, maybe they just put him at linebacker. Who needs CJ Allen?
He's big enough. I'll say that. Golly.
Also, the other thing you have to accept in all this is that tight end talk in the first round, as a guy who grew up a Falcons fan, is a sensitive subject.
Oh, he's sensitive about his Kyle Pitts pick. Yeah, sorry about
Hold
that.
on, before I go, can I have one quick Kyle Pitts confession?
Go ahead.
You love Kyle Pitts coming out.
I love Kyle Pitts. I thought he was fantastic coming out.
So did
every single year in fantasy football, I have drafted Kyle Pitts. Every single year. My team name this year was "This will finally be Kyle Pitts' year," right? And he had a breakout. That game where he had like 200 something yards though, in that best game of his career. That was a playoff game for me, and I had him on the bench, and I lost. So I didn't actually believe this is something someone would rip me for if newspapers covered fantasy football league transactions and movements, and I put my hand up in accountability.
So,
I got my comeuppance for ripping Kyle Pitts because in fantasy football, and Kevin loves fantasy football talk because he plays in like 8 different leagues.
I do not.
But I lost out on money this year basically because Kyle Pitts beat me in the playoffs. So,
so you got it then. You got that's karma, pal, right there. That's your Kyle.
Always good to wrap up on some Kyle Pitts talk. Joe.
So you're ripping me for Jake Ferguson, and now you're talking about Kyle Pitts.
Hey, okay. I'm getting my time. I'm reclaiming my time. No,
we're not doing that. We're not doing that here. All right, Joe. Thanks, man. We'll see you next time. We'll have you for when's your 3-0 coming out?
I don't know off the top of my head, but soon. I'll have a Cowboys 7-round mock draft coming.
Me and Joe, we follow the pack, right? Because I do my roster 1.0 and my roster 2.0, and that's all like off of Windows from back in the day. We never do a 2.5 update, like just a half an update.
Yeah, no half.
Like maybe you could just do an update that's like the top 7 picks. I don't know. Make it 2.5. Who knows?
Who knows?
All right, Joe. It was great,
Joe. All right, there goes Joe. It's fun talking about all that kind of stuff. I love talking about it. I love reading about it. I know it's all crazy because nothing ever ends up like what you think it's going to be, right? or it rarely does. I don't know.
Well, people see opportunities, and it changes the entire landscape of the draft. And some teams are better than others at holding their cards to themselves. So
Yeah, not those Cowboys. I always say,
the only thing that drives me crazy about the draft, Kevin, is I mean, we spend so much time over analyzing it, and we still get these long breaks in between picks. I just wish it moved faster. That's all.
yeah, that'd be all right. I don't care. It's like all that stuff. It's like, what have I got to do? Nothing. So
You're a
I'm
busy
okay.
man.
Nah, we are busy, but I don't know. It's okay with me. I don't mind. All right, so let's move over now and talk about those Rangers, because you and I, as we're taping this, are back in Big D. But by the time people get this or listen to this podcast, I guess we might be back in Surprise, or at least you be back. I be going for the first time.
That's right, and I'll be leading you by the hand,
as always. And we're gonna see what's going on out there. So, Evan, at this point, are we halfway through camp here?
It's a good question, Kevin. I mean, we're basically 3 weeks out from the start of the regular season. So, you figure usually spring training from the time pitchers report. I don't know if it's the mathematical midpoint, but yeah, it's right about the mid stages.
Right about middle.
And this is a weird camp too because of the World Baseball Classic and the additional off days, and that changes some pitchers' schedules and whatnot. But yeah, we're at about the midpoint. We're at the point where the Rangers have sent out their first round of cuts and starting to narrow things down. So yeah.
Okay. So we can kind of start to draw some conclusions a little bit, although it's always dangerous in the spring. Listen, it took me way too long, probably up until, I don't know, last year, to finally decide I got to stop putting too much stock in this in spring training. There's just it just like, remember last year Alejandro Osuna, it just tore it up, just looked like $1 million in spring, and Bruce Bochy's putting him in the Hall of Fame, and it's all great. And then he finally gets his chance, and then he just doesn't look special. I know you and I had that conversation. I just said, you want you want them all to look like Wyatt Langford, right? And
we can talk about that too.
Well, we can. That is not what Osuna is, and I'm not saying he can't end up being a nice player. But every year you kind of look at these guys and look at the roster, and I know that Cam Cauley has kind of made an impression in this spring. He's done a good job. Is there somebody else that you would look at, or how would you rank those people on the fringes that as far as making the final the roster?
And that's the thing, right? I mean, the way baseball spring training works, these guys who are on the fringes, they can have a great first half of camp. Then they start facing real big league pitchers, or then they start facing guys who can face them more than one time. And so they're going to use different stuff against them. And so it's on the fringe guys, the only thing you can really do at this point in time is either earn yourself a longer look or disqualify yourself. And the perfect example for me was last year. Kumar Rocker had a great chance to go and earn a job in the starting rotation. His first 2 starts out of the gate were really bad, and he basically disqualified himself there. So I think my point on all of this is there are guys who have earned longer looks, and certainly with the injuries that the Rangers have had to Josh Young and Cody Freeman and Justin Foscue, Cam Cauley has played well, and he's a middle infielder, and so there's more opportunity for him now.
And he can play a little center field too.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, they always move their middle infielders out there. I haven't seen him play center field, and I got to be honest, I haven't looked at his numbers to see if he's played any center field.
I think he has.
But my point on all this is, these guys, that's what the first 2 weeks are about. Some young guys getting an opportunity to kind of like stand out. And what Osuna did last year was he capitalized on that to put himself in a position to get a call up. Now, when he came up in the regular season, he was a little bit overwhelmed. But what I like about Alejandro Osuna, what I liked about him last year, what I liked about what scouts told me was that this was a guy who had baseball ability and learning ability. And if you look at his numbers over the last 6 weeks of the season when he came back again, they were more than adequate. He was an on-base guy, and that's what he should be as a big leaguer. So where I don't know if I would say disappointed or where the opportunity really exists is like in the bullpen. There are jobs open in the bullpen, and there are some young guys who should be making real bids for that job. I do think that Carter Baumler, the Rule 5 pick, has really opened eyes and has the Rangers like leaning towards saying, okay, we're going to do everything we can to keep him. But the other guys, the guys who look great,
Explain why that is.
explain why
Carter
they want
Baumler.
to try and keep him.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing with Baumler and any Rule 5 pick is you've got to keep him
Right,
on the active roster all season, or at least 90 days active, not counting IL time, in order to not have to offer that player back to the organization that you drafted him from. And so the Rangers went into this knowing that was the risk with Carter Baumler, and they also knew that their bullpen was going to have holes, and it was going to be important for everybody in the bullpen to contribute. But his ability to throw strikes and throw above average velocity for strikes has really been impressive so far. As camp goes on, he's going to face more and more big league hitters, and then you'll get a better feel. But the other guys, guys who were advanced in the minor league system, Mark Church, Emiliano Teodo, Winston Santos, they've either been hurt or haven't been out there. And in Collier's case, he's been a little bit inconsistent with the strike zone. And so those guys haven't really seized the opportunity here to get longer looks. And that's been the disappointing element.
I wrote this in my newsletter the other day. My favorite thing that, just from afar, because I haven't been out there yet, but Skip Schumacher has said is basically, I don't care how fast you throw strikes. That's all I care about. And I kind of overamped that a little bit, but that's basically what he was saying, is to throw strikes. And I didn't really know this this statistic, but that was one of the reasons why the bullpen was so good last year, was because they threw the first strike a lot, and that's on first pitch, first strike. So
particularly Sean Armstrong. Sean Armstrong was unbelievable, and he's gone now. So,
well, that's to me, that's where the Rangers historically have gotten in trouble, I think, with pitchers before this administration, and and it's a different ballpark and it's different things and all that. I get all of that, but that was, I mean, going back to the 80s about guys not throwing strikes, right? Bobby Witt struggled with that forever. It's like, at some point, it doesn't matter how hard you throw. If you don't have location, none of it matters.
Stuff only matters when you throw it for strikes, or when you're deceptive enough that guys will chase it. And so, I also think that what Skip is saying and what Chris Young is saying about this are the things that people say when they don't have a high octane arm in their bullpen. If you do, then it's a real asset. Now, look, in a perfect scenario, last year was a great example. You had Hobie Milner from the left side with this really funky arm angle. And if you had that guy with his off-speed stuff and his junk, and then you follow him with a real high-octane guy, that makes both guys even more effective.
Sure.
And in a perfect world, the Rangers would have that, and they've got some arms with that stuff. But it is still more important that you throw strikes, and the Rangers have proven over the last couple of years that Kirby Yates didn't have overwhelming stuff, and he was lights out in 24, and they solved some of their bullpen problems in 24. That bullpen was not by any way last year considered to be a real strong point for that team going into the season. And they more than acquitted themselves because they threw strikes and didn't waste pitches and were reliable. So, I mean, two things can be true, right? It would be nice to have a high octane arm in that bullpen, and it would help. But at the same point in time, if they're not throwing strikes, you go with the guys who are.
Yeah, I'm just that way all the time, though, Evan. There's nothing more frustrating, as a fan or anybody. I mean, you go down to Little League. That's why I didn't ever want my boys to pitch, because I know that every parent in that stands out there is thinking, throw a strike. That's what they're all saying. So that starts at that age, and it just moves along all the way down the line. So
Used to move into the press box every once in a while. Fraley would yell out, "Mix in a strike!"
it's always good to bring up a Fraley reference, isn't it? We can't say the one that he used to always say when they would give the pitcher's line, right? What Staley would
Yes.
say out loud. We can't
It
say
had
that
to do with
on a family
horse
podcast. Horse
bodily
manure.
functions.
Yeah, he was horse manure. But anyway, yeah, that's going to be the issue for me. Look, so many times, and we were just talking about the draft and talent and all that kind of stuff, and you get intoxicated by talent. Everybody does, because if you have uh, separation type talent like Deion Sanders had, right? So fast, so light on his feet. When you're that fast, it makes up for any mistakes you make, right? It makes up for mistakes that other people make. When you play like that and you have that kind of talent, well, it's just a little overwhelming. But to me, that's always the issue as a talent evaluator. And when you're putting together rosters, at some point you have to say, but can this person do the stuff we want them to do? Can they perform all the functions that we want them to perform on the field? And for me, if it's a question of one or the other, I'm going to side with the guy who's doing what he has to do, right? Uh, Doing his job and doing it every day. That's what I want. I used to say this, about a shortstop. I didn't care, because that was a little bit of the thing with Elvis Andrus, right? He was capable of making a great play. He wouldn't always make the routine play. I want the guy to make the routine play every time. Whether you make that spectacular play every once in a while, I'm okay with that, or I'm not okay with that. I'm not asking you to do that. I am asking you to make all the plays you're supposed to make.
Well, I do have a little bit of PTSD on that one phrase, only because in '98, citing what he had done in '96, Johnny Oates kept talking about Kevin Elster, and he makes all the routine plays. He catches the ball hit to him, but in the case of Elster at that point in time, the ball had to be hit directly at him because he had no ability to go either way, and so you need to have some ability. But yeah, I can give up a guy who makes one great play out of every 100 balls, compared to a guy who's going to make more routine plays 7 times out of those 100 balls, 7 times more
Yes.
than the other guy. So
Yes.
that's all important. And this is one of the reasons I do love Alejandro Osuna is, besides the energy that he has and the approach that he has. Look, throughout the minor leagues, this was a guy who got on base. And for me, that's something that's always going to apply. And I thought the Rangers undersold him a little bit, because this was a guy who had a really good knowledge of the strike zone and took professional at bats at every level. And on the offensive side, for me, that's the same thing about throwing strikes. You're at least giving yourself a chance to compete when you go up there with a good approach at the plate and knowledge of the strike zone.
Yeah, and one other point about pitching too that's always kind of blown me away a little bit is that Mariano Rivera, when he was throwing that cutter, he was just throwing it and letting it break one way or the other, but he's throwing it in the strike zone and letting it break, right? And too many pitchers I see now, they have good stuff and they're trying to hit a dot here on the corner or something like that. It's like, how about just trying to throw it down the middle and if your stuff is that good, and let the action take it out of play.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing, is like Mariano had the ability to have pitches that looked like a strike out of the hand, either end up a strike, but moved just enough to keep bats off of making solid contact, or did move enough off the plate where a guy was still having to chase it. But when
Yeah.
you have command of the strike zone, only then can you really expand the strike zone. I mean,
Oh, absolutely.
so
Yeah, for sure. All right. What else we need to talk about for the Rangers before we get out?
let's see. I don't have a lot. Obviously, I've been home the last couple of days. Sean has been out there. This is typically a time, once you get past into that first 10 days of exhibitions, guys are still not going terribly long into games. And like I said, you can make some impressions, but you're not going to make a team. The jobs that are going to be won are going to be won in the final 2 weeks of camp. It's that simple. there aren't that many jobs to win. I think
Well,
the
then
two
let me ask you
things.
about that then, because the one job that has to be won is the big one at second base with Josh Smith. So
I don't
how do
think
you
that
think?
has to be won. I think it
You
can
don't
only
think
be
so?
lost.
Oh, I see what you're saying. But he's going to be yeah, that's my point. He's going to be your second baseman. How do you think he's done so far?
I think he's been fine. You know, he's hit a couple of balls really hard. I again, you know, it's two at bats like every other
Right.
day. And so
Yeah.
I'm just not, as long as he's like not striking out every time and as long as he's staying healthy, for me there's no concern about Josh Smith. I think two things that stand out for me about stuff that I've seen on the field is the Rangers are trying to be more aggressive on the base pass, which every team tries to do in spring training, but I think this is more of a mindset this year. You know, you've got a new third base coach in Corey Ragsdale, who I think wants to be more aggressive on the bases. You've got Travis Jankowski, who's going to be at first base and who is a base running type guy. And so I think he's encouraging guys to run more and to push the envelope a little bit in spring training and better understand some things. One thing that I pointed to right before I left camp was in the first inning in Cleveland, Sam Haggerty, who's having a really good camp, singled, and he's got good speed. And Danny Jansen followed with a ball, a catcher followed with a ball into the gap. And Sam tried to score from first in the first inning, was thrown out. I think that play probably gets reviewed in the regular season, and I don't know which way it goes. But what stood out to me was you've got Danny Jansen, a catcher who ends up at third base, took the extra base on the throw home, and that's something I don't feel like I saw the Rangers do very much last year. Was when there were opportunities to grab that extra base per se, I don't think they did that. So those are things that stood out for me there. You know, Evan Carter has pushed his leads a little bit, got picked off at first base once, basically by trying to push his lead out a little bit more and get that because the Rangers want him to run more. And then the other thing that stood out for me is it is unfortunate, and hopefully they're just short term injuries. But Josh Young and Justin Foskey both have muscle injuries. You know, Josh and Justin both have long history of muscle issues or injuries. Let's put it that way, injuries. And this is a big year. You know, you've written about Josh Young. I've written about Josh Young. This is a big year for Josh. And even 10 days in spring training, I think you can make up for that time. But I also think that, you know, you get to a point where you come back. It's the last 10 days of camp, you want to have a good finish to camp, and all of a sudden, you know, you start chasing results, which is what Josh did during the season. And one thing leads to another. You end up in a bad place to start the season, and he can't afford to be there at the start of the season.
Yeah. One thing before we get out, I want to amplify a little bit that on the speed thing and the running deal. And I believe that my theory is that one of the reasons why people don't know how to run, you know, like Evan Carter doesn't know how to run. He doesn't know how to steal bases. Is that
I
they come
dispute that a little bit, but go ahead.
well, is that they came up in an era where no, everybody's just slugging now, right?
Right.
And so then the rules got changed. You know, you can only throw over so many times, all that kind of stuff, and that changed it again. And if you're not taking advantage of that now, you're crazy. Now the Rangers did; they were one of the better running teams in baseball last year, and so I give them credit for that. But you need to be maximizing that, especially if you've got guys who can run. Now they haven't had that; they've only had a couple of guys who could run. But that's why this team needs to be more athletic than it has been, and it needs to be right because it's a gift. They are just giving you second base now, and you have to take advantage of that.
And it's, for me, it's not so much just the idea of stealing. They were an effective base stealing team last year, and their stolen base percentage and their number of steals were both above league average. For me, it stands out that the Rangers were not aggressive in taking extra bases in opportunities that would allow either outs or just to sustain run scoring chances, right? Like
Right.
moving up on a throw, um, being better able to read balls, you know, in the outfield and what you can tag up on and move. So those are things that I think they're doing. You know, Skip and I had a conversation after a game that was. It's never a great environment to try and have a conversation after the game. They're very brief rundowns. But I had asked him about that play where Haggerty got thrown out at home, and it's something I want to dive into a little bit more when we get back. Is that, you know, I think the Rangers are experimenting with the idea that do you send a guy with 0 or 1 outs all the time if there's a relay play? There's some data that suggests that's a high percentage play, and I think the Rangers are trying to evaluate that right now.
Yeah, well, the relay always is, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you send a guy just because you're telling them you have to make a perfect throw.
But there's
Right.
more. I think as we continue to plumb the depths of statistical and data retrieval, I think we're finding that there now is data to back it up, that rather than you just say, hey, they got to make 2 perfect plays, there's data that says, no, it works out the higher percentage of the time. Boom.
Yeah,
it does.
For sure. Well, I'm all for that. All right, that's going to do it for our podcast this week. We hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back next week, and Evan and I will be doing it from a surprise. We'll have to be in different rooms, though.
It'll be a surprise podcast.
Surprise podcast, yeah. And hopefully we'll have somebody else on with us, too. Maybe talk a bit about the Cowboys or whatever. We might surprise you with what we come up with. So make sure you tune back in. So from everybody in here and everybody out there, thanks, and we'll see you next time.